Breaking tonight, the White House on defense in the face of several global crises today described as worse than anything we have seen since the 1970s. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Tonight, a dramatic series of events playing out across the globe and an administration seeming to be in denial about their existence or their scope. First, there is Israel, where we have reports tonight the terror group Hamas has now turned to armed drones in an attempt to terrorize our closest U.S. ally in the Middle East. Next, there is Iran, where an intense effort to halt a nuclear weapons program today produced an Iranian offer to slow down the machines that are currently enriching uranium in an attempt to produce warheads. Not exactly a major breakthrough. Then there's Iraq, where an al-Qaeda offshoot has not only created the world's first terrorist state, but it is now apparently infiltrating the Iraqi army, creating concerns of a, quote, insider threat for the hundreds of U.S. advisors being sent there. Syria is so horrifying it almost defies description. The administration was issuing warnings almost 2 years ago, and fighting rages on tonight with death toll estimates now reaching 170,000. And there's more. The crisis between Ukraine and Russia also reached a fever pitch this weekend as the Russians promised, quote, irreversible consequences for what they claim was a Ukrainian mortar attack that killed a Russian civilian. And on our own southern border, a surge of young immigrants so desperate that Fox News today received reports that the bodies of children are now washing up on the shores of the Rio Grande after failed attempts to cross into the United States. Despite all the evidence, the president recently suggested to some young Americans that things around the world have never been better.
If you had to choose any moment to be born in human history, not knowing what your position was going to be, who you were going to be, you'd choose this time. The world is less violent than it has ever been.
Less violent than ever? The Wall Street Journal today suggested the last time we saw things this bad was back during the Carter administration. And here's what happened when our own Ed Henry today challenged the White House on that.
How does the White House react to the notion that the president is a bystander to all these crises?
I think that there have been a number of situations in which you've seen this administration intervene in a meaningful way that has substantially furthered American interests and substantially improved the tranquility of the global community.
What? Mark Thiessen is a former presidential speechwriter, a Washington Post columnist, and a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Dana Milbank of the Washington Post, not exactly a conservative, comes out and writes today, tranquility? Where? In Iceland? I mean, that's being mocked. Tranquility?
Yeah, tranquility. Yeah, that's the word. That's the word we're looking for. Tranquility. Where is it tranquil? In Israel? Is Israel tranquil? Is Iraq tranquil? Is Syria tranquil? Is Afghanistan tranquil? Is Ukraine tranquil? None of these places are tranquil. This is the least tranquil time we have had since the 1970s. And what do we have in common with the 1970s? Feckless leadership from the White House, which is contributing to all of these crises. President Obama came into power and reached out to our enemies instead of standing shoulder to shoulder with our adversaries, cut defense spending instead of increasing it, and has retreated from the world instead of projecting American power. And the result of that is he wants to restrain American power. Our enemies don't see restraint. They see weakness, and weakness is provocative. And when they see weakness and a vacuum, they're going to step in and fill it, and Islamic radicals are ascendant in the world right now.
But is this comparison to the Carter years fair? Because, there was such malaise in the 1970s on so many fronts, especially the home front, more so than many believe is happening right now in this country. And many have posited that comparison is simply not fair.
It is not fair. I agree with you. It's not fair to Jimmy Carter. The fact is, when Jimmy Carter, after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, Jimmy Carter figured out that he was wrong, and he turned around. The Reagan defense buildup actually started under Jimmy Carter. After the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, he increased defense spending 4.6% and pledged to do it for the next 5 years. He announced the Carter Doctrine, in which he said that America would use military force in order to defend its interests in the Persian Gulf. Has Barack Obama done any of these things? Barack Obama is sending pink slips to to our military while all this is happening right now. He's launched the biggest defense cuts in American history. He's withdrawing from the world. He's not projecting American power. I mean, Jimmy Carter, for all of his problems, was actually a more learned from his mistakes and tried to correct them. Barack Obama doesn't seem to be changing anything.
Now, you were, among other things, the chief speechwriter for President George W. Bush, and in particular, you had a focus on foreign policy. You know that he was accused of cowboy diplomacy, of getting us involved in too many wars, of shooting first and asking questions later. And then we had Barack Obama, who took a different tact. You know, critics of George W. Bush would say, we had to change. We had to step out because we had been so aggressive under George W. Bush that the American people no longer had the stomach for further cowboy diplomacy.
Well, you know, yes, I've heard those complaints. There was something called 9/11, which happened, where thousands of people were killed in our midst. I was in the Pentagon, so I felt that building shake. And our country felt the building shake. And so we had to go out and defend our interests. And what has happened is these problems are the result of our policies. Iraq and Syria. Obama wanted to withdraw and end Bush's war, so he pulled out and created a power vacuum. We had defeated al-Qaeda in Iraq, which is now ISIS. We withdrew. They have come back into power, are creating a state in Syria and Iraq. And you know who's helping the Iraqis to defend themselves? Iran. So we now have a situation where our Shia enemies are fighting our Sunni enemies for control of Iraq. That's what happens when America withdraws. And I know people are weary of war, but we can't. If this is what we are seeing, all the pictures you're showing on your screen right now, that is the result of what happens when America does not lead.
Mark Thiessen, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Megan.
And joining me now with more, Mark Hanna, a Democratic campaign veteran who worked on the Kerry and Obama presidential campaigns. Mark, tranquility? Tranquility?
Yeah, you don't see a lot of tranquility in the world if you're reading the papers or if you're watching the news right now, Megan.
Right.
Completely agree.
You shouldn't have said that.
Tranquility may be the wrong word choice, for sure. Is the underlying point, though, that the world is, in general, looking back at history, looking at the Cold War, where we faced the threat of nuclear annihilation, looking at, for example, world wars, where we had major powers.
We kind of face that right now.
We don't face nuclear annihilation.
Well, are
right
we a
now.
little worried about North Korea? We're a little worried about Iran. I'm a little worried about ISIS. Did you hear Eric Holder talking about Syria and the bombs being made over there?
The article that was published in the Wall Street Journal today was alarmist. There was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal 2 years ago that actually affirmed what the president said, that in terms of people who are dying violent deaths is down more than it's ever been, and as a result of free trade, as a result of commerce flowing, as a result of cosmopolitanism. There are people that want to basically portray the president as weak. Has his foreign policy been cautious? Yes, but what got us to these problems in the first place? It's not an abundance of caution. Mark Thiessen was saying the Bush's policies, you know, for example, 9/11 somehow tying that to our national interest in Iraq, that's bogus. And it's been shown to be bogus.
Well, that's, I mean, in retrospect, there seems to be agreement on that point. But let me ask you this.
There was not enough caution.
Because I point to, you know, the Bush administration with Thiessen, because I do think there's a correlation to the American public's feeling about our intervention overseas. We got hit on 9/11. The public was very much behind going over to Afghanistan, less so Iraq, and now in retrospect very much against the Iraq war. But we had a president who at the time said he was trying to bring the battle to the enemy rather than having them bring it on the home front. The question is whether now we have a president who is too reluctant to lead, leaving us more vulnerable than ever.
I don't think so. You've got the President Bush wanted to take the battle to the enemy. In doing so, his plan strategically backfired, probably creating more terrorists than he destroyed, stirring up resentment in the region, which we're seeing right now with the formation of ISIS.
There was plenty before
Iraq
we went over there.
Iraq, the fact of the matter is, Iraq did not pose a national security threat to the United States before we went in. Now, with the creation of ISIS and its radicalization in the region, it does. That's you can't dispute that.
Well, I don't. But I'm not disputing that point necessarily, but I'm disputing the status of Iraq, because Vice President Joe Biden said it was going to be his administration, the Obama administration, is one of their greatest successes.
Right.
And something happened on President Obama's watch that changed that. And I look at the president and I hear him describing this threat as JV. 3-4 months later, it's got a caliphate in the Middle East, and they're taking aim at us. I mean, people are asking for accountability.
ISIS announced a caliphate. The Sunni sort of fighters that are all independent of one another in Iraq aren't loyal to al-Baghdadi. They're not loyal to this caliphate.
So you're not worried about ISIS?
ISIS is a legitimate threat. All I'm saying is that they wouldn't be a threat if our boneheaded foreign policy of the previous administration didn't go in, if we weren't foolhardy before. So I think an abundance of caution rather than not enough is probably advisable right now.
Mark Hanna, good to see you.
Thank you, Megan.